Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Deploy Friday, the Platform.sh live stream where we talk about all things interesting going on in web development. Today, we're going to be focusing on Drupal and the Drupal Decoupled Menus initiative. And I'm very, very happy to be joined by three people here involved in that initiative. First with me, I have Liam Hockley. How are you doing, Liam?
Hey.
And I also have Brian Perry. Hey, Brian.
Hey, happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. And then also, lastly, we have Théodore Biadala. How are you doing, Théodore?
Hello, good, thanks.
So we can go ahead and get into what the initiative is, but maybe just a round of intros first. Brian, you mind telling us who you are, where you are, what you do?
Yeah, I'm Brian Perry. I recently started working at Pantheon, and I'm specifically focused on customers who are doing, hosting decoupled sites, which aligns really nicely with my role in this initiative as well. I'm one of the initiative coordinators in the Decoupled Menus initiative. I live in the Chicago suburbs, and something fun about myself, I suppose. I don't know how fun this is, but I got blood work done yesterday and passed out.
Oh God!
Good time. I have a history of that, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah, but I'll try to stay conscious during this this chat we have. So
I do hope so. Hey, how about you, Théodore?
Hi, so I work at Acquia for a few months now. I'm in the Drupal acceleration team. The role of this team is to bring Drupal forward and make it so that we have releases on time and we just secure and everything. So lots of general work on Drupal core mainly. And I live in France, northern France actually. So next to Belgium, we have very nice beers. So that's good. Yeah. That's about it.
Thanks, Théodore. Hey, Liam.
Hey. My name's Liam Hockley. I live in Los Angeles, California. I am originally from England, but moved to America like 17 years ago. Oh, actually, no, more like 20 years ago now. Time flies, right? I work for a company called Age of Learning. It's an ed tech company. They don't do anything with Drupal. My work with Drupal has been very much in a lot of my free time. It's just been very much a passion project, and that's including this initiative. Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep.
I think I went so fast at the beginning, I don't even know if I introduced myself. I'm Chad Carlson. I'm a member of the DevRel team at Platform.sh. And my relationship to this initiative is only hearing about it when it was first announced, following a little bit on the sidelines as I did my own work, helping people with decoupled apps at the platform, and pretty curious about just what the initiative is, how it's been going, what its goals are. Maybe we could start off first. How do Drupal initiatives work? If anybody wants to give me and anybody who doesn't know an idea of that, how do we come up with them? How do we decide that they're going to be a main priority for an upcoming version of Drupal?
I guess I can take this one.
Because
so initiatives are fairly new in Drupal, and they're a way to focus the work we do on certain topics. So someone has an idea about a big thing that we should be doing in Drupal. They start to talk about it mainly in the chat, usually, or people to people during events. Then they formalize this a little bit more, post an issue in the Drupal IDs queue. That's the typical way that it's done. And in this queue, we discuss about the topic, saying, is it a good idea? What should be the scope? What's the proposed roadmap? And when this is more or less, ready, people start to say, I want to be involved in this or that capacity, like in project management, in just development, or maybe coordination. And once we have the roadmap team, it goes to the core committers, I think, or maybe Dries directly, that say this is an official initiative, and this is like the core team is going to be focused on this topic for the next few months, few years. This happened with the auto updates, the decoupled menus. We also have stuff about deprecating some old libraries for Drupal 10 release. Also making sure that the contrib ecosystem is going to be ready for Drupal 10 and the PHP MySQL requirement that goes with it. So all those kind of things.
One thing that was kind of interesting about this initiative, especially how some of us came together, is that this, at least the first I had heard of it, was announced during one of Dries' keynotes. I guess it was DrupalCon. Was it DrupalCon Europe?
It was global.
Global.
Okay. Yep.
Hard to remember. But yeah, so this initiative, came to many people's attention through that venue, and it was a little bit of a different path in that, basically a handful of us and others, jumped into a Slack channel. I think Gabe created one, and that was kind of how this initially started to organize. So it was a little bit of a different route from other initiatives, which was kind of interesting.
Okay. And so how did you all find your role in it, if that was the start? You joined the Slack channel and got appointed into your position to lead?
So not really. So Gabe was really at the start of the initiative. He pitched the idea to Dries back in last year actually. And Dries thought it was a good thing, and he kind of cheated and announced it in his keynote, so it kind of got more attention than other initiatives maybe. But there was no formal definition of what this initiative should be, and actually what he presented and what we're doing is kind of different because of discussion we had within the people involved in the initiative. And so we started to get organized and discuss about what we should be doing in this initiative, and the people that put this plan into place. So it was Gabe, Buddy, Liam, myself, and a few others. We said, okay, this is kind of ready. We know kind of what we're going to do. And at that point, Dries was like, okay, so tell me who's going to lead that, or who's going to be the coordinator, and who's kind of accountable, I guess, for making sure that this goes forward. Mm-hmm. And at that point, Gabe, since he was there from the start, proposed to be coordinator. Didn't want to go alone, so I proposed to join him as a co-coordinator. And then Buddy came in for outreach. It's too bad she's not here, but outreach, kind of product management as well, and Liam in the similar capacity for making sure that we do things properly.
Sure.
So it was kind of group decision, not someone that say, okay, this is going to be like this, that we're going to do it.
And I'm the newcomer, the rookie here, and Gabe has moved on to focus on other things, and I've taken on his role. But how I actually came to the initiative, I did jump on the Slack channel when it was announced at DrupalCon, but followed along lightly, but wasn't really all that involved. And then, interestingly enough, on another podcast where the initiative team, the Talking Drupal podcast, I happen to be co-hosting, and Batty, as we actually talked about in the pre-show, she was like, "If you're looking to participate, I've got something for you to do." So I got involved for the hackathon that we did at DrupalCon. And started working on a set of web components that can be used for decoupled sites. And it's kind of my involvement in that got me more involved in the initiative, and eventually led to me taking on this role.
Yeah, got it. And I suppose I should say how I got involved. I mean, it's already been sort of hinted at. Yeah, I joined the channel along with Théodore, and when Gabe created it, and it was literally, I found out that was pretty much right when Gabe even created the channel, and we all joined it. And it was, I think it was, I didn't even let the keynote finish before I joined the channel. I'm like, this sounds really interesting, because before that I had made like a personal portfolio website, and I'd made it decoupled, and and I had there was definitely some hype there on using Drupal as a headless CMS, and it was something quite new to me at the time. And I was like, this is really interesting stuff, And so I just dived in, started getting involved. And then my role was definitely more along the lines of, I was at all the meetings trying to take notes and, trying to make sure we, had, records of all the stuff we talked about. And there was a lot of discussion very early on. We had to basically invent the whole process of how we were going to do this initiative. There were so many challenges that I'm sure Théodore can go into a bit more in depth with, in terms of how do we release JavaScript packages and things like that. And all of these things, like there's a lot that goes on, behind the scenes to make governance changes within, official initiatives like this one. So, yep. And
I was just going to say the big takeaway from both Liam and I is that if you want to get involved in an initiative like this, step one, show up.
Yeah.
So
just start talking.
Join that Slack channel. Yeah.
At first, I was just asking a lot of questions. I was very curious, and I'd be in the Slack channel, I'd be like, what about this? What about that? And it really gets discussion going. And I think it's really important that if you want to be involved in something, maybe you feel like you don't really have any expertise or any input, well, you can always ask questions. You can always, and you might ask just the right question that somebody hasn't really quite thought about yet, or that they'll just explain it for everybody else that's there in the chat. So, there's always something I think you can do that's valuable in an initiative, even if you don't feel like it. So, is the moral of the story there? Yeah. Yep.
I like that. All right. I do want to get into what the challenges you guys have been facing specifically with this initiative, but let's start at the beginning, maybe with you, Liam, since you were doing it in practice. And I'm sure all of you were, but what's the problem trying to be solved here, and why was it considered so important for Dries to fast track it, for it to catch all of your attention in the beginning? Like, what's the problem here, and what are you guys trying to do to solve it?
Yeah. So the problem was really, I think, quite clearly outlined in the Dries note, where he showed an example of a developer and a content editor in some of the slides, and that's what sticks out to me. When I think of what is the challenge here, and it's about it's not so much about rolling in this cool new tech. It's about making a more seamless process between site builders and the developer, right? And that's at the core of this, because it's not necessarily just about menus. It's about kind of kicking off a snowball that will then result in, other decoupled components that will in turn just make the experience a lot easier for content editors and site builders. And then the developer can just focus on what they do best, and that's the code, I suppose, right? So that's the core problem, that is trying to be solved by this initiative. And then sort of second to that we were quite aware of very early on, is that this was going to kind of set a pattern for future initiatives that were similar. And like I said, Théodore can go a little more in depth into this, but there's a lot of challenges when it came to how do we handle JavaScript code that's part of Drupal, but not part of the actual Drupal code base, which is written in PHP. So, and it's just little those challenges that help us to then modernize. And that was definitely, I think, at the core of Dries' message was, we want to modernize this framework, and we want to, allow it to, move it forward in that way. Yep.
And to add to this, there was also the aspect that we have competition within the CMS ecosystem. When a company wants to build a decoupled website, Drupal is often not the first choice for whatever reasons. And the idea was to make Drupal experience for the developers and developer teams on par with the best decoupled experience that exists today. So to make sure that when you want to make a decoupled website, if you choose Drupal, you're not going to get something that's less good than another solution, at least. Yep. And the idea is to be the best, but that's a hard thing to do. Yeah.
And one other thing that sticks out for me is also the idea of like setting standards and best practices in some of this work. I know that most everybody in this discussion has done, some form of decoupled Drupal projects, and probably had the experience that, every time it was a little Wild West and you were kind of reinventing things over and over. So I think, anything that this effort can do to, establish some patterns and standards is pretty helpful too.
Okay, so there's plenty of options. I know I'm seeing it every day. It seems I'm seeing another JavaScript-based headless CMS that touts itself as the most reliable, easiest for both teams, creative and developers, to get started on. But Drupal has this leg up of community history that they're not a year-old project trying to do the same thing, where we can start an initiative with, like you said, Liam, a first focus of menus, setting new standards and best practices for initiatives and new additions in the future, to really set people up to consider Drupal seriously when they're trying to do this. Why the focus on menus in the first part?
So
you go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So this one was because, he wanted to have decoupled Drupal being a good experience, but this is a huge scope, right? And the idea is to go with menu is that because other CMSs are not very good with menus. Like if you go to, what are the other one? Like Strappy.
I think it's Contentful, another option.
Yeah, Contentful. Yeah. It's not straightforward to make a menu. But Drupal has a long history of managing menus, having a UI for that. And this is something that we already have, that we only need to expose to people for them to use. So it's a small enough piece that's kind of missing in other CMSs. So it was a good candidate to start with that because it's small enough.
Right. That makes sense. And a bit strategic.
Okay.
All right. I get that. So what's been the challenge specifically with dealing with the JavaScript of it, of doing the packaging alongside this major, code base that you have that, like you said, Liam, is a part of it but isn't? What's been going on there?
So just quickly, before this decoupled menus initiative, we had a JavaScript modernization initiative, which tried to make some administration interface into a React app to make it, faster for the user, but not necessarily, faster in the background. Just the perception of it, and it was a, fully decoupled React app that you had to install a bit differently than other modules, but it was, something that worked. And this didn't get into core because you probably didn't hear about it, or if you hadn't followed this initiative, you probably don't know what they did. And one of the big issue with previous initiative was that there was no path to go from like something outside of Drupal written in a modern JavaScript framework and bring that into Drupal core. Because the current maintainers or core committers are very PHP oriented, and everything JavaScript is a bit, they're less comfortable with it. And bringing a huge thing like React and all the dependencies with it into Drupal core was just not something that they were prepared to do. So one of the first things we did in this initiative was to solve this issue of, how to manage the JavaScript if we ever need to write some for this initiative. So we came up with a long document on what does it take to maintain a JavaScript package, publish that on NPM, manage the versioning, the testing, all this kind of stuff. And we had to talk with the DA as well, the Drupal Association, to make updates to the GitLab, updates, to turn on some GitLab features for us, create general project, that kind of things. And well, to me, that was the very critical part of this initiative, was to make sure that we didn't hit the same roadblock as the previous initiative did.
And it's probably worth digging in a little bit more on that concept of a general project, because it's really important to kind of what's been done so far and the future. But so, there are contrib projects in the Drupal space, but the assumption is that they are PHP projects, some variation of a PHP project. So as part of this initiative, the general project type was created, and the assumption there is it doesn't have to include PHP code. So it could be JavaScript module that's published on NPM. Another example, just kind of theoretically, is like it could be a home for something like Drush, which is not currently a contributed project. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of work to be able to create that project type and the standards around it. And it definitely was one of the things when I learned about it that drew me more into the initiative, because a lot of the work that I have done as a front-end developer in the past are things that don't necessarily belong in the contrib space or awkwardly fit there. So really having a home for this, things that I'm doing for Drupal projects but aren't Drupal code necessarily. It's great to have that finally.
Yeah. And where is that at? I mean, how successful do you think that the team has been in setting up this general project or this path for non-PHP contributions? Are we there?
I think it's been quite successful. Shortly after that project type became available, there was a proof of concept, essentially that Théodore actually had published on there as a kind of an example, which is helpful to kind of show people, hey, this exists, But I mean, yeah, like Brian, he started putting his web components on there. And I think within just a matter of weeks, we did see a good handful of, JavaScript code showing up as general projects. And that's, to me, that's a sign of success, the fact that it's being used and in very quick time. It's almost like people wanted it, So.
Yep. And for example, with the web components project, and this was a lot of what we focused on in the hackathon in DrupalCon, but it publishes the module to NPM, and it's also using Tugboat for live previews. It publishes for pull requests a storybook. So having that tooling in place is pretty nice. There are certainly some things that some enhancements that we're still looking to do. For example, for contrib projects that aren't considered part of Drupal core. There's no way to automate the process of publishing modules to NPM. So there's still a little bit of a manual aspect to that, but we're looking at some options to have that be something that can happen as part of GitLab CI. And then also maybe another thing that's worth mentioning is, there's the idea of JavaScript code that is part of Drupal, essentially part of Drupal core that gets published to NPM. So there actually is one module now that's under the Drupal namespace on NPM. It's a replacement for jQuery once. So that's also another kind of interesting application of this general project type, and that is something that is actually published in part of Drupal's namespace and considered an official Drupal node package. And there might be other versions of that in the future, but in the contrib space, anyone has the ability to create a general project that is under a different namespace.
Got it. Okay. What's the feeling on the status of the current initiative then? We want decoupled menus. Yeah. Where are we at there now that we have all this stuff set up around it? Where are we at?
Yeah, I was going to say we talked about a lot of the setup, but not about where we are.
Yeah.
So the initiative is pretty simple, right? It's expose menu data through an API. So this was done like in the first few weeks of the initiative. Mainly Gabe wrote the code for this. So we have a decoupled menu contrib module that provides a couple of endpoints where you can get the menu data in a format you can consume in your decoupled app. I still need to write the issue to get that into Drupal core. But the idea is to bring this contrib module into Drupal core so that automatically when you want to have a Drupal decoupled a decoupled Drupal website, you can just enable this module and get your menu data. So what we want to have is to have the data exposed to people, and then write documentation on how to use it in decoupled app. Because we're not going to provide like a menu component that's configurable for anyone to use, because projects are way too specific. I mean, they have their own thing going, and probably they're not going to want to use our menu components because they have very specific requirements or something. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is provide a path for them to understand how to use it and make this path as easy as possible. So the focus is going to be now on documentation, because we have the code, we have the endpoint, we have the data. I mean, there's still some bugs and something that we can do in the module, but mainly it's there. And now it's a matter of exposing that in a friendly way that's easily understandable.
And because that module code exists and the API updates that happen in Drupal, it's also at the point where the community has been able to run with it. So even though Drupal is not going to ship a menu component like under the Drupal namespace, we have a reference React menu, a web component menu. There was a menu created in Svelte. I think there's some variation of a Vue example as well. So yeah, even though we're not shipping a menu component, there's also a lot of reference examples out there too.
Yeah, and that's sort of where these general projects sort of also fit in. Is this initiative provides the back end changes that are necessary, and then the general projects are going to house all of the varying implementations on the front end, whether it's React, web components, whatever. None of them have to be official, but it's just providing that ability to decouple, and it all being on Drupal.org, right? So and all maintained there and stuff. So
okay, how's it seem so far? If people are already testing reception from JavaScript people, what's that been looking like, or is that a big focus of how you're writing documentation and calling for people to contribute their own versions of this?
So for now, it's mainly been Drupal people that have been involved and tried to use it. So maybe it's easier for them to understand how it works with Drupal than people outside. But what I'm personally waiting on before reaching outside of the Drupal community is to have the documentation up and running. Because without this, it's all going to be very painful for anyone to come in and try to use this. Just because Drupal is kind of complex in itself.
Yeah, is that a new problem? Try to get people up to speed well enough that an entirely different community can start contributing there?
Yeah.
Well, it's a new problem in the sense that we didn't really try before.
Okay.
Well, not to my knowledge, at least.
Yep, and I think that may also help kind of influence some of the things that this initiative or an initiative like it does in the future. Trying to continue to think of ways that we can offer tools and packages that allow people who don't think in Drupal but think in JavaScript to make it easier to work with Drupal or more attractive to work with Drupal. Mm-hmm. So yeah, getting past our Drupal friends is definitely an important part of this too.
I think it's helpful to stick on the menu thing to begin with, because I'm working with all kinds of people who are working with Strappy or Directus, and they're running into the same problem, to at least get them curious in the first place. But yeah, I wonder how much of an overhaul that is to get people enough information in the first place. Okay. Let's touch on what's left to be done. It's documentation. That's really the big component here, aside from the few bug fixes that may be left on exposing in the module.
Yeah, I mean, getting the module into core is going to be, it's going to take a while.
What's that process like?
Well, I mean, a couple of modules try to do this. So basically, you start in contrib, like the CK editor 5 work is starting in contrib, and then it's going to get into core. But the idea is to get a module working well enough in contrib so that people can use it and, it makes sense to develop there. Mm-hmm. Then you submit that into the core issue queue, saying that, okay, this is a module that we've been working on towards like a core initiative. Please review it and tell us everything that's wrong with it so we can fix. I mean, that's basically what happened with Claro, or especially Olivero as well. So they started in contrib and then, like a huge list of things to fix to make it stable inside of core. So it's probably going to start as an experimental module. It's like the new state of module that we had for the past few years. And once all the major bugs are fixed, it can get the stable status. And then, not have a warning when you try to enable it. Mm-hmm. But, there's a lot of gates to go through to get code into core, and it takes some time.
Right. Yep. That's a good thing. Is the hope Drupal 10? Is that the hope?
I would hope before, but the time frame is very short, so probably Drupal 10. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's a small enough module, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's spinning off of this for you guys in terms of, if we've set up this whole process behind contributing like this, and we're at this stage with decoupled menus, what's coming on the horizon that's going to use this same set of workflows and practices to contribute JavaScript into Drupal? Anything raising your eyebrows?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, obviously menu was essentially our proof of concept, but
yeah,
I definitely would like to see, us be able to then quite quickly follow the process and then, have other parts of the page be decoupled. And then I think the real challenge that we are aware of, and it has been kind of raised, and that is positioning of components, right? So like we have just the menu right now, but once we have a lot of different parts of the page, I think there are going to be some discussions on, okay, how do we determine where it goes? Is that the responsibility on the front end purely? And then, is there like, because there's certain things that like when you like regions and things like that exist with a traditional Drupal site, that, would we have a concept of that if there were like a whole bunch of different decoupled parts of the page, and I think there are discussions that could be had, but I would like to see, something more than just a menu and follow the process. But I think we have to take one step at a time, and we have to just, let's get this menu through, get it in core and everything. And then we have, okay, this is, like Théodore said, fix the big bugs and things that come up. There might be something we haven't even, encountered yet or haven't thought of yet. And that's kind of the, it's why, like you said, it's good that there's quite a strict process in order to get something into core. It's, the hope is that if there's anything really, we're doing really wrong, that that it will be addressed, and then we can take that and and hopefully the next one will be quicker. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, I can talk to that a little bit from the perspective of the Web Components project, and I'll also introduce a fifth guest to the podcast.
Hey, buddy.
Hello.
You said you were going to have a cat, Chad, but I so far win on cat count. But
hiding in the closet.
I had to shut my cats out.
I closed the door, but apparently that doesn't work well enough. Anyway, so I've mentioned the Web Components project a little bit. I can even also just talk about that at a high level. So it's a general project in Drupal, and initially we put together a menu component, but the idea is that rather than using a particular framework like React or Vue or any of the JavaScript frameworks, it's using native web components, which can be used in any framework. And so the components are things that could be used in a framework agnostic way, and then also can be used within Twig as well. So the components should be possible to use with data that comes from Drupal's APIs, but also in Drupal's traditional Twig-based rendering layer. And related to all that, we essentially have from my perspective, is kind of a pretty complete version of a menu component. So we actually have a meta issue in the issue queue talking about what we could focus on next. There have been a handful of ideas there, breadcrumbs being something that's easy and similar to menus, all the way to a generic way to be able to render content from a content type in a particular view mode. So I would definitely encourage people to check out that project and specifically that issue. If you want to start working on another decoupled component, or if you just want a framework to learn about web components in.
And web components are great. I would highly recommend.
Yep.
And sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say also, it feels at home in the Drupal community as well, trying to find things that can be, reused and aren't tied to a particular framework.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On my end, what I think we should be doing next is the page and the laying out the page, and whose responsibility is it? Site builder or developer to say what the page look like. It's a very broad topic, but something we should be starting to discuss soon. Mm-hmm. We have also the authorization or login decoupled. That's kind of not great today. So making this easier to work with natively, that would be a good next step, I think.
I hadn't really thought about this first part of whose responsibility is it. Isn't it kind of a JavaScript sort of expectation that I'm going to be in full control of what I do with the data I pull from my decoupled backend?
Then you need to call your developer when you want to change a menu link.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that was the idea as well to go with the menu. Is that because we have a fully administrative, well, you can administrate the menu as a site builder or as an editor. If you use what's in the API to provide to display the menu, you don't need to call your developer if you need to change the menu, right? Mm-hmm. Which is something that happens in many decoupled projects because it's all hard-coded somewhere.
And I think on the front end, there are some layers to that too, in that the data is coming from the API. And then, it's likely going to end up in some sort of state management solution if we're talking about like a full web app. And that's another situation where the JavaScript developer has some control over how that data is transformed and used. And then there's also, just how it is rendered on the screen and styled and things like that. So, we're Drupal is in control of that first step, and we're trying to provide the best tools for that first step. And then the further out you go from that, at least from my perspective, we want to make sure that it's possible for JavaScript developers to be able to customize things in the way that they want or need.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to me, I'm more in about the site builder, where he needs to be able to customize what he needs without a developer.
Yeah, and on, just to add to that, let's as a more practical example, you're a site builder, you have a menu, it's horizontal at the top of the page, you want a side menu, right? And like Théodore was saying, typically if you wanted that to be a side menu, you're going to have to contact the developer, they're going to have to, work on the front end and make it work. But imagine a scenario where you go into edit mode, you take that horizontal menu at the top and you just drag it to the side and boom, there it is. You as the editor have the control then, and maybe that illustrates kind of, the whole positioning thing. Like, wouldn't it be cool if the editor was in control of their page? The layout even, to the point where the developers then their focus is really on the component itself, making sure the data's hooked up right and things like that. So but there's a lot that could be discussed on that for sure.
Sure. Makes sense. Liam, you got involved very early in the initiative, as soon as, would you say, before the Dries note was even finished, you were in the Slack channel? Like,
a few of us were, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure all of you were, but I don't know. I'm curious of everybody's, day-to-day involvement outside of the initiative in Decoupled Drupal, and maybe what you have at Age of Learning, but just why is the initiative important to you guys in the first place and a focus of your time in the last few years?
Yeah, no. So for me, I was extremely new to Drupal, right? I barely even knew how to use Drupal at that time, and I'd still, a lot to learn. It's quite a deep framework, but it did seem like this was a growing trend. Like at that first Drupal, that was my first ever DrupalCon too, right? And it seemed like a real growing trend that, a lot of people, they want a decoupled site. They want that ability to take the data layer that Drupal offers. And I've since learned that it's quite a robust layer that it has, and how it, manages data entities and things like that. And then use that, but then also have a fancy new modern JavaScript front end, and I just sort of dove in, and I think I saw the clunkiness when I made that first portfolio site. With Decoupled Drupal, I had to figure out how JSON API worked. I had no familiarity with that at all, and I was like, "There's no edit or anything." Functionality. It was just simply grabbing the data and then just making little components, and I built a React app essentially. But yeah, then this initiative came out, and it was like, this is something that's like an official thing that's gonna. I guess I'm really like, my mindset's always about let's try and like move forward, and this seemed like something that's very much, this is trying to move forward, trying to take something that. I'll be honest. My first opinions of Drupal is it's very dated, in the UI.
How dare you?
And it's something that I see this initiative, and I'm like, but it doesn't want to be, or at least Dries doesn't want it to be. He wants to, it to be, more modern, and we can move it forward. And I want to be part of that. And I just sort of jumped in, and that's when I really sort of got to see what the Drupal community is like. Because again, very new. I didn't really have much experience, and I met some people that were like really welcoming, and it's been a great group of people to work with. At first I was like, guys, I don't have much to input here. I don't have much experience in Drupal specifically. But then it was met with, that's great, because we want outside perspectives. Because before that, I've been, a web developer for professionally since 2018, but I've been interested in the web and seen it go from from the 90s to what it is today, and it's something that's been a fascination of mine, and Drupal's kind of a vehicle for that. As as a project, it's an open source project that I could just dive into, a great community, and it just sort of went from there, you know.
That's awesome. It does
Yep.
seem from the outside also being pretty new. Never hearing of Drupal until about 2 years ago. Very welcoming and open to any and all contributions.
Yeah, I mean, the code might not be that welcoming, but at least the community is.
Join the discussion at least.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Brian, how about you? I don't know if you have the personal connection to this yourself, or what kinds of. No, I'm super curious of in your job, what are clients looking to solve, and how do you see this decoupled pattern trend working when people are actually trying to implement it for large scale sites? Like, how is that going?
Yep. Yeah, I definitely have the personal connection, although I am still reeling from all of Liam's Drupal shade, but I'll get over it.
All feedback welcome, I thought.
Yes. No, I mean, honestly, that is the perspective that we need in this initiative.
Yeah.
So, so I've kind of recently transitioned between jobs, but my perspective on this initiative kind of crosses over between both of those things. So previously I was working at an agency called Bounteous. Shout out to all my Bounteous friends. And I led a lot of front-end builds for decoupled sites. So that was what initially drew me to this initiative. You know, what can Drupal do? You know, specifically from my perspective, it was a lot of the pain of, you know, having to solve problems myself, or, you know, not really being able to find, you know, standards for decoupled Drupal builds or best practices and things like that, and kind of hoping that this initiative would kind of lead some things in that direction. And then recently, I started working at Pantheon, and so a lot of my responsibility at Pantheon is to work with customers who are hosting decoupled sites at Pantheon, and also trying to, you know, help hear their feedback and funnel that into the engineering team in ways that we, you know, can build things that can better support hosting decoupled sites. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and all of those things I think are very, very intertwined. You know, another thing that I'll be focusing on at Pantheon is essentially creating some reference implementations. So again, you know, I think there's the level of, you know, on a particular hosting platform, you know, this is the way that you can best host a decoupled site at Pantheon, or, you know, Platform for you, Chad, and things like that. But then I think some of those standards can also kind of find their way into the Drupal community at large. And yeah, and one other thing kind of related to that is I also do find people solving a lot of the problems over and over. Like, for example, a lot of the different decoupled projects like Nuxt or the Next.js Drupal project all have like some form of an API to get data from JSON API, and they all do it slightly differently. So again, I think there's opportunities to you know, reuse and share code in a, you know, framework agnostic way.
That's great. Okay. How about you, Théodore?
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit different because I've been JavaScript maintainer for Drupal core for about 8 years now. And Drupal is not well known for its JavaScript, right? So when the JavaScript modernization started, I couldn't take part in it because my job was I was way too busy with my job and didn't have time actually to work on this in my spare time. But I saw how it went. And when this initiative started, because it's decoupled, because we're talking about JavaScript and Drupal core, you know, I was interested because of my role as a JavaScript maintainer. And I saw that as an opportunity to, you know, bring things that I've been trying to to change a little bit for a while. It did work, so I'm happy about that. But mainly, I didn't want to hit the same roadblock that the previous initiative did. So making sure that you know, we're not going to run into the same kind of issue and dead end kind of that we had before. And that's why I'm very happy that we have a pretty large team for an initiative. and especially with Buddy and Liam, as a more project manager type of role. That's usually initiatives don't have that, and it's been really, really helpful to make sure that we communicate with people that need information, that we make sure that we do the things that we said we're going to do. Like keeping focus is is pretty hard sometimes, so it's nice to have someone saying, okay, no, we said we're going to do that, so let's do that and see the rest later. So it was mainly about setting up the initiative and making sure that it's going to be successful, more than the specific topic of Decoupled. I didn't have to lead Decoupled website. I had to fix some of them, but I was not very always very involved with building a whole Decoupled website. So I was, to me, it was making sure that the basis of the initiative inside the community is going to be healthy, and that we have everything we need to actually do the work that people expect us to do.
Right. Do you have an impression of adoption or excitement of people hosting Drupal and Acquia, of people who are really wanting to do this outside of your involvement in the initiative?
So I've been at Acquia for about 3 months. I used to work there like 7 years ago, but no, I don't have a lot of contact with clients. Someone else might be better to answer this question, but no. For Acquia specific stuff, I don't have an answer for that.
No, that's all right. I mean, Brian, you say you're seeing them, and it's people looking for reference implementation, and you're getting feedback that you hope makes its way back in the Drupal community. Is it high adoption, a lot of excitement from people who are trying to use and leverage Pantheon to do this specifically with their sites?
Yeah, I'm even newer than.
I know you're new too. I'm just curious to ask the question.
But I would definitely say, from my experience so far, there is a lot of interest within Pantheon customers and Pantheon itself in hosting decoupled sites. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a mix. I think we have there's some early access customers that we have in kind of like a closed beta for some of our offerings, but also, getting to know our customer base. There are others who are have either kind of created decoupled hosting options themselves, or are looking for kind of ways in. But yeah, definitely seeing a lot of excitement and interest. How about you, Chad?
I'm seeing it more and more people, but on a variety of different backends. It's not necessarily a huge Drupal focus for the people who come into our channels now. It's still people using WordPress, and a lot of people using some of the new and fresh headless CMSs that are purely JavaScript, but people not trying to dip their toes into PHP to start off with. They'll pick one of those for whatever they may lack against something like Drupal or WordPress, and they're starting with that. And people are curious. It's interesting, with Platform. So much of ours is built around, repeatable builds alongside read-only file systems and production on every environment. But so many of this decoupled conversation is revolved around live previews or fast rebuilds, and a lot of stuff that not always, but often will depend on development environments, which changes the way we handle data. So it's kind of been an interesting little experiment of explaining the specifics and the little gotcha rules of our platform around this problem in particular, because this is where we're seeing the edges of what people are trying to do on Platform.
Yeah, and I think you brought up something quite interesting, how you're saying that, like, you're not seeing necessarily, a lot of people that are using like a PHP backend and a JavaScript front end. And I kind of have a bit of a theory behind that, because, since starting my new role, I work with primarily native PHP and JavaScript and the modern versions of those. And one thing that seems quite clear to me is that it's hard to find developers out there that have that know enough PHP and JavaScript to be very productive. I mean, at least that's what I'm being told. I mean, these places, they're struggling to find people with, and they're not necessarily hiring one developer specifically for JavaScript and one for PHP. You've got some, they kind of want, the full package, and it's just a hard to find package. So unless you're like maybe of a certain size or maybe that's just, I think it's a hard business decision, to have a PHP team and a JavaScript team when you could just have a JavaScript team, right? And that's maybe part of the issue there. And I think that goes right back to something that was mentioned earlier. I think Théodore mentioned it, that or Brian, or I don't know who mentioned it, but
it was one of us.
About being one of you guys, about being able to like use the tools you're familiar with in order to create this front end. So maybe down the line, you don't have to know the ins and outs of PHP in order to be productive with a decoupled Drupal site, right? And maybe that's a challenge, worth digging into, is, making it at least a general out-of-the-box solution that where you don't have to get too in the weeds with the PHP side of things if you don't have that on your team or you don't necessarily want to, right? I mean, so it's the option's there, but it doesn't have to be, right?
I definitely don't disagree with the general statement that it's difficult to find a PHP JavaScript unicorn. Like, that's definitely true. But I will also say that, even just in my limited time at Pantheon, I've seen a lot of interest in the WordPress community around Decoupled as well. And, since I've been so focused on Drupal, more visibility into WordPress is kind of new to me. But they even have, a number of, specific projects. There's one called Frontend that is actually funded by Automatic that, does provide that kind of turnkey, easy to start decoupled option. So I've seen, in the WordPress community, more interest and more people doing it than I expected going in.
Yeah, I've normally just done Gatsby and React is sort of what I focused on with this, but somebody just popped in with Frontend yesterday, actually, like trying to get that going. Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth checking out if you Drupal people want to spin up a WordPress site.
Right.
Drupal needs to invent something similar.
Well, I do think that there are things that we can learn from that and other projects for sure.
Yeah.
As always.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, that's definitely.
Well, we're in the final minutes here. I don't know if there's anything else that you think we didn't cover, should cover, or otherwise maybe repeating just the call to action of how can people contribute to your initiative, to Drupal, get started with any of this?
Yep.
Right.
I was just going to say, we sorry. I'm sure you'll have things to add, but we have meetings, Slack meetings in the Drupal Slack, the Decoupled Menus Initiative channel, and we have meetings every other Tuesday. That can people can participate async within their time zones. That would definitely be the first step if you want to get involved in this initiative. Join us in those meetings, introduce yourself, and we'll certainly find things for you to do.
Yeah. Next one is next Tuesday.
That's right.
And documentation, you said, it's the big starting point.
Yeah, documentation. Yeah.
If there's technical writers out there, some free time.
Right, and we do have a whole bunch of stuff written. It's not like you'd be writing it from scratch, right? We have a whole lot of stuff that we just need to sort of drill down, maybe get some examples in there and stuff. But yeah, it needs finishing essentially. So yeah.
And I'm definitely looking for friends who want to learn about web components.
I was going to say the web components project. Yeah. How do we find out and get involved in that?
Yep, that typically comes up during the meetings, but there's also on Drupal.org a generic Drupal web components project.
Yeah.
So check that out as well. There's a handful of open issues, and you can see the demo storybook. It's all out there for you to play with.
Great. Liam, anything to add?
No, not much more. Yeah, documentation's big. Did we say what the channel name is for the Slack?
No, you join the Drupal workspace, and then it should just be the Decoupled Menus Initiative. Decoupled Menus Initiative, right?
That is correct.
I'm in there. I'm silent, but I'm in there.
Yep. So, yep. And just join, and make sure you say hi when you join, and we will say hi back.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Liam. Yep. Thank you, Théodore. Thank you, Brian. It was really great having you all here. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody who watched the show and or watched us later. Next week, Robert Douglas is going to be back hosting. And until then, thank you all and have a great weekend. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep.
My cat says bye.
Bye, cat.